The slamming door that ended my old life was nothing compared to the silence inside the mansion where I was instantly given new rules for survival. I sold my freedom for a clean slate, only to realize the price was stealing state secrets from the very family that cast me out. The sound of the front door slamming echoed in my ears long after it actually happened. It was the sound of my entire world fracturing. 7 years. 7 years I poured everything I had into that house, into their comfort, into being the good son they could parade around at their dreadful garden parties. And then, one misplaced, desperate plea for help, a plea about a debt I couldn't outrun, a debt that was spiraling toward something truly ugly. And it was all over. "Get out," my father had spat, his face a mask of patrician disgust I hadn't seen directed at me since I was 10, and broke a priceless Ming vase. Only this time, the damage wasn't ceramic. It was my perceived failure. "We don't harbor weakness here. You made your bed with that mess. Now sleep in it, but not under our roof." My mother, predictably, just cried silent, theatrical tears into a silk handkerchief, offering no defense, just reinforcing the verdict with her sheer, suffocating disappointment. My sister, the golden child, already engaged to a junior partner at a prestigious law firm, just looked through me, as if I were a smudge on the expensive window overlooking their manicured lawn. I stood there, in the driveway, the late autumn air instantly chilling me to the bone, despite the heavy coat I was wearing. I had nothing. My bank account was already tapped dry, trying to keep the wolves from my door. My luggage was the worn messenger bag slung over my shoulder, containing my laptop, a few changes of clothes, and the gnawing realization that I was now completely adrift. The only thing I still possessed was the immediate, paralyzing fear of what would happen if I didn't solve this debt problem in the next 48 hours. It wasn't just a financial hit. The people involved weren't the sort to accept IOUs or sympathetic glances from the local constabulary. I walked for hours, the cold seeping into my shoes, the streetlights blurring through the sting of unshed tears. I ended up near the edge of the city, where the pristine suburbia gave way to the older, more industrial parts of town, the kind of place where rent wasn't quoted in thousands and nobody asked too many questions about your past. Sleep was impossible. I huddled in a dingy, overpriced motel room that smelled faintly of stale smoke and regret. By morning, the raw panic had sharpened into a grim necessity. I needed cash fast, and I needed it without access to my old accounts or contacts. The only option left was work so menial, so far beneath the life I'd been raised to expect, that I hoped no one from my old life would ever see me doing it. I scoured the online job boards, filtering for immediate start, cash paid daily, and no background check required. Most results were scams, or worse, thinly veiled fronts for criminal enterprises. Then, one listing caught my eye. It was starkly professional, almost arrogant in its brevity. Exclusive residential services required. High-end domestic cleaning and light property management. Discretion essential. Must be physically capable and punctual. Immediate start available. Apply via encrypted message only. Exclusive and high-end sounded like a cruel joke, but the discretion essential part resonated deeply. If I was going to survive this, I needed to disappear into a role where nobody looked too closely at my resume. I sent a carefully worded, generic reply, scrubbing any hint of my previous life from the text. Within an hour, I got a response, a precise address in the most exclusive gated community in the county, and a time, 4 p.m. that afternoon. No name, just a service entrance code. Driving my old car, which suddenly felt like a beacon advertising my desperate situation, felt like crossing into enemy territory. The security gate slid open with a quiet, expensive whir. The houses here weren't just big, they were monuments to wealth, set back hundreds of feet from the road, boasting architecture that cost more than entire city blocks. I found the address. It was a modern mansion, all glass and sharp angles, guarded by walls that looked more like art installations than barriers. I nervously punched in the code. A side door, designed to look like part of the stone facade, clicked open. The interior was blindingly silent. Everything gleamed. Marble floors, soaring ceilings, and a view that made the city look like a toy town spread out below. I stood paralyzed in the entryway, clutching my nearly empty bag, feeling like a stray dog who had accidentally wandered into a 5-star restaurant. A voice, deep, cultured, and utterly devoid of warmth, cut through the silence. "You're late." I spun around. Standing at the top of a sweeping, floating staircase was a man who looked carved from granite. He was tall, impeccably dressed in tailored charcoal slacks and a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled precisely to the mid-forearm, revealing strong wrists. His hair was silver at the temples, his face sharp, and his eyes. They were the color of frozen slate and held a penetrating intelligence that instantly made me feel transparent, like he could see the exact amount of fear currently coursing through my veins. "Sir, I apologize. I thought the gate code was—" He didn't let me finish. He descended the stairs slowly, each footfall echoing. "I don't care about the gate code. I care about promptness. You are applying for a position of absolute trust here. If you cannot manage a simple arrival time, how can I trust you with the keys to my entire existence?" My heart hammered against my ribs. This wasn't just a rich guy. This was someone powerful, someone used to instant obedience. I needed this job. I swallowed hard. "I understand, sir. It won't happen again. I'm ready to start immediately. What do you need me to do?" He stopped 3 steps from the bottom, studying me with an unnerving intensity, his gaze lingering on my slightly crumpled coat and the frantic edge in my eyes. He let the silence stretch, heavy and suffocating. "What I need you to do," he finally said, a faint predatory smile touching his lips, "is clean my estate. Everything, from the chandeliers in the ballroom to the grime in the subterranean garage. But before you touch a single dusting cloth, you need to understand the terms." He leaned in just slightly. "I own this property and everything on it, and you belong to me while you are under this roof. You will work 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. You will ask no personal questions. You will never speak unless spoken to. And if you ever, for any reason, attempt to deceive me, leave without notice, or bring any trouble at all, onto my property—" He paused again, tapping a single manicured finger on the marble railing. "I have resources that will make your current predicament look like a playground dispute. Do you accept these terms, mister?" He actually paused, realizing he didn't know my name. "Liam," I managed, my voice surprisingly steady despite the adrenaline dump. "My name is Liam." "Liam," he repeated, tasting the name like it was something slightly unpleasant. "Welcome to the service entrance. Your first task begins now. My main study requires immediate, meticulous attention. There's a small, locked safe behind the 3rd volume of the Shakespeare collection. I need you to dust it. And Liam, do not, under any circumstances, look at what's inside that safe. It's not your business. Now, go to the utility closet. Your uniform is waiting, and don't smudge the marble on your way out." He turned and swept back up the stairs without a backward glance, leaving me alone in the echoing hall, the weight of this new, desperate servitude settling onto my shoulders. I found the utility closet. Inside, hanging neatly, was a stiff gray jumpsuit embroidered with a small, nearly invisible crest. As I pulled it on, feeling the cheap fabric scratch my skin, I caught my reflection in the polished chrome of the nearby fire extinguisher. I looked like a ghost of myself. I found the study. It was immense, lined floor to ceiling with leather-bound books. The air smelled richly of old paper and expensive cigar smoke. My hands trembled slightly as I located the designated section of Shakespeare. The 3rd volume, a heavy, gold-leafed edition of King Lear, felt oddly loose. I pulled it out, and there it was, a small brushed steel safe, perhaps 8 inches wide, built right into the back of the shelving unit. My instructions were clear: dust it. I reached for the microfiber cloth, determined to follow the rules to the letter, to prove I was worthy of this meager lifeline. But as my hand brushed against the cool metal of the safe door, I felt something subtle beneath my fingertips, a faint vibration, a barely perceptible hum, as if the safe wasn't entirely dormant. Curiosity, the most dangerous weakness of my life, flared up again. Just a quick glance, I rationalized. He said not to look inside, but what if the exterior gave a clue? I angled my head, trying to see the small digital panel. The numbers weren't lighting up, but as I leaned closer, something on the surface of the safe caught the light. It wasn't a reflection. It was a minute, almost invisible etching, a symbol that looked terrifyingly familiar. It was the same stylized bird emblem I'd seen branded on the ring worn by the man I owed the debt to. The same symbol associated with the shadowy network that had promised to make my life a living hell if I didn't produce the money by tomorrow morning. My blood ran cold. I wasn't just cleaning for a rich eccentric. I was cleaning for someone connected, deeply and dangerously, to the very people who were hunting me. This job wasn't a safe haven. It was a gilded cage built directly on top of a minefield. I snatched my hand back, my breath catching in my throat. He knew. He had to know who I was running from. Why bring me here? Why task me with cleaning the very object connected to my pursuers? Just as I slammed the heavy copy of Lear back onto the shelf, plunging the safe into darkness, I heard the soft sound of the study door clicking shut behind me. I froze, heart hammering, realizing I was trapped inside the room with him, facing the one man who might either save me or destroy me entirely, and I had just accidentally touched evidence that linked his world to mine. I slowly turned, the scent of expensive wood polish suddenly mingling with the acrid smell of pure terror. He was standing there, arms crossed, the look in his slate eyes suggesting he knew exactly what I had seen, or rather, what I had almost seen. His shadow stretched across the polished oak floor, swallowing the last vestiges of sunlight filtering through the tall windows. I didn't need him to speak. His posture screamed accusation. I felt every drop of sweat instantly turn icy beneath the utilitarian gray uniform. The silence wasn't just heavy, it felt pressurized, the kind of quiet that precedes a massive sonic boom. "Liam," he finally said, his voice dangerously soft, devoid of its earlier professional sharpness. It was the tone one uses when addressing a particularly frustrating piece of malfunctioning equipment. "I asked you not to touch the safe. I asked you not to look, yet here we are." I had to think fast. Lying poorly would confirm his suspicion that I was some sort of clumsy amateur, easily manipulated or discarded. Telling the truth, that I recognized the gang symbol linked to my impending doom, was a massive gamble. "Sir," I began, forcing my gaze to meet his, trying to inject a desperate sincerity into my voice. "I apologize sincerely. I was dusting the volume as instructed. My hand slipped, and I brushed the safe. It felt warm, almost vibrating. I was startled, and I noticed a small mark on the steel, a scratch, perhaps. I leaned in to see if it was debris I should remove, nothing more. It was a weak defense, but the vibration detail was genuine enough to lend credibility to my story of being startled. I prayed he wouldn't ask me to describe the scratch in detail. He tilted his head, a gesture that was utterly chilling. He didn't move toward me. He simply observed, dissecting my every facial micro-expression. Warm? Vibrating? A scratch? He let out a low, humorless chuckle. "You have an imaginative faculty, Liam, one I hadn't accounted for in my hiring profile. You see, most of my staff simply clean the dust off the surface and move along. They don't attempt to diagnose the internal mechanisms of my security apparatus." He took one slow step into the room, closing the distance by perhaps 3 feet. I braced myself, ready to bolt, though I knew running in this house would be futile. He probably had silent alarms wired into the very air ducts. "Tell me, Liam," he continued, his eyes narrowing slightly, "what else did you notice while you were so diligently inspecting this scratch? Did you perhaps notice that the security company that installed this safe happens to share a director with the holding company that manages my late wife's charitable foundation?" My mind blanked. Wife? Foundation? This was layers deeper than I could have possibly imagined. I knew the man I owed money to, a ruthless operator known only by his street moniker, the Broker, dealt in high-risk collections and asset recovery. I had no idea he was linked to the legitimate financial world, let alone a man of this stature. "Sir, I saw a shape, a very small mark. It looked like a bird emblem, very stylized, but I truly don't know what it means. I assumed it was the manufacturer's insignia." His eyes widened fractionally, the first genuine reaction I'd seen. It wasn't anger, it was recognition, laced with something that might have been calculation. He stepped fully into the room now, his composure briefly cracking to reveal a flash of intense concentration. "A stylized bird," he murmured, almost to himself. He walked past me toward his massive mahogany desk, picking up an antique letter opener, turning it over and over in his fingers. "That's interesting. Highly interesting. I was under the impression that particular mark was restricted to a very small circle of associates." He dropped the letter opener onto the desk with a sharp clink. He looked back at me, and the mask was firmly back in place, but the energy in the room had fundamentally shifted. He wasn't just testing me anymore. He was evaluating me against an entirely new metric. "Liam," he said, his voice now regaining its commanding pitch, "you are now privy to information that requires a very specific response. You came here running from something. A debt, perhaps? A misunderstanding with some unsavory types?" I couldn't deny it. My silence was an admission. "Good," he breathed out, a strange satisfaction in his tone, "because I require a specific kind of employee, one who understands the necessity of silence and who is already acquainted with the rougher elements of this city. Loyalty, for me, is not bought. It is earned through necessity." He walked to a secure drawer in his desk, a drawer that looked far more sophisticated than the safe hidden behind the books, and pulled out a sleek, modern burner phone. He tossed it onto the desk near me. "You have 48 hours, Liam, before the gentlemen who are currently interested in your whereabouts decide to pay you a visit. I can make them wait. I can make them disappear entirely. But my protection is not free. It is infinitely more expensive than whatever paltry sum you owe them." He leaned against the desk, crossing his arms again. "You will keep cleaning. You will be meticulous, and you will do exactly what I tell you to do next. Starting tomorrow, you will begin monitoring the back perimeter cameras, the ones overlooking the service road specifically. You will log every vehicle that slows down, every person who lingers, and every late-night delivery. You will compile a detailed report, cross-referencing any familiar vehicles with the information I am about to give you." He then slid a small encrypted USB drive across the desk toward me. "This drive contains encrypted profiles of several individuals connected to a recent, unfortunate investment of mine. They are liabilities, Liam. People who know too much or who have proven themselves untrustworthy in handling certain sensitive matters. I suspect one of them might be the reason you are currently scrubbing floors instead of sipping single malt in a private club." My stomach twisted. This wasn't just about cleaning anymore. This was espionage, or worse. He wasn't hiring a cleaner. He was recruiting an asset, someone expendable and already compromised. "What do you want me to do with these profiles, sir?" I asked, picking up the cool, heavy USB drive. "I want you to recognize them. And if you see any of them near this property, or if you hear any whisper of their activities while you are out running necessary errands for me, purchasing specialized cleaning supplies, for example, you will report it immediately. If you successfully identify a threat before it materializes, I will clear your debt entirely and offer you a position that will make your former life look like poverty." He looked me dead in the eye, his expression turning utterly grave. "But if you fail, Liam, if you betray my trust, or if you try to use this information to bargain with those you owe money to, then I will not only let them take you, but I will ensure they find you even more swiftly than they would have otherwise. I do not tolerate loose ends, and you, my dear cleaner, are currently a very loose end, tied loosely to my own silk tie." He gestured toward the door with a flick of his wrist. "Go, review the files tonight. Be ready for your first surveillance shift at 5 a.m. And Liam?" I paused at the threshold, leaning against the doorframe, terrified to breathe. "I already know your father's name. I know your sister's fiancé. If you try to contact them for help, I will not be the first one to know. I will be the last thing you ever see." He turned back to his desk, picking up the antique letter opener again, seemingly already engrossed in work. He dismissed me without another look. I stumbled out of the study, the burner phone heavy in one hand, the encrypted drive burning a hole in my pocket. I was out of the frying pan and into a massive, climate-controlled industrial oven. As I made my way toward the modest, basement-level room he had assigned me for the night, a room that looked more like a secure storage space than living quarters, I frantically plugged the USB drive into my old, barely functioning laptop. The drive immediately unlocked, displaying not profiles of debtors, but dozens of schematics, heavily redacted legal documents, and a series of chillingly detailed reports on covert surveillance operations. It was clear this man wasn't just wealthy. He was running a sophisticated private operation that skirted the edges of legality, perhaps even crossing them entirely. One file, flagged with the highest security warning, was titled Project Chimera, Internal Security Review. My cursor hovered over the file, my fingers slick with sweat. This wasn't about my debt anymore. I was knee-deep in this man's secrets. I clicked it open, fully expecting to see corporate espionage details. Instead, the screen filled with blurry, zoomed-in security footage taken from a grainy nighttime camera feed. It was a scene I recognized instantly, though the context was terrifyingly alien. It was the street outside my parents' house, and in the footage, standing beneath a flickering street lamp, was the broker himself, looking directly at the camera, his hand holding up a small silver object reflecting the light. It was the exact stylized bird emblem I had seen etched, or vibrated, on the safe. But that wasn't the worst part. As I watched the looping clip, a second figure materialized beside the broker, a figure who was clearly handing the broker an envelope, smiling faintly in the poor light. The figure looked distressingly familiar, even obscured by shadow and distance. It was my sister. My golden child sister, the one who had looked through me without a flicker of sympathy when I was thrown out, was apparently meeting with the very man who was now threatening my existence, right outside my childhood home, just last night. The replay stuttered, forcing the image of my sister, Elena, meeting with the broker to freeze frame. Her posture was too casual, her smile too practiced for a chance encounter on a dark street. The envelope exchange wasn't clandestine. It looked like a business transaction, one performed with chilling familiarity. My entire reality tilted again. The debt I was running from, the one that cost me my home and my family's respect, wasn't just my problem. It was entangled with the people who were supposed to be my sanctuary. I slammed the laptop shut, my breath rasping in the tiny cold room. The shock was paralyzing, quickly followed by a surge of white-hot betrayal. They hadn't just thrown me out. They had thrown me to them. My father's disgust, my mother's silent tears, It was all an elaborate performance to ensure I was neatly packaged and delivered to the wolves, perhaps to keep my proximity to their pristine lives minimal, or maybe even to use me as leverage against whatever deal they were cutting with the broker. I looked at the burner phone on the desk, then at the master's instruction to report any suspicious activity. If Elena was involved, then my entire survival strategy had to change. Reporting this to my employer, the man with the slate eyes, who was clearly maneuvering in the same dangerous sphere as the broker, could either expose my sister, or worse, get me killed for knowing too much about his network's internal conflicts. I had to confirm it. I had to know the nature of their transaction before I brought this nuclear bomb of information to the man who held my fate in his hands. I scrambled for my messenger bag, pulling out my old, deactivated cell phone, the one piece of personal tech I'd kept hidden, knowing surveillance would be tight here. It was useless for calls, but its camera, while grainy, might still function enough to get a closer look at the few stills I managed to capture before the footage looped. I managed to pull up the most recent screen grab of Elena and the broker. I zoomed in, enhancing the contrast painfully. My sister was wearing the distinctive sapphire pendant that my father had given her for her engagement, a piece that was famously irreplaceable. And the broker wasn't just handing her an envelope. He was gesturing toward the pendant, and Elena was nodding intently. It wasn't a payoff for my debt. It felt like a handover, a debt being settled, perhaps, using something far more valuable than cash, or perhaps sealing an agreement that involved my disappearance. The thought galvanized me into action. I couldn't wait for 5 a.m. surveillance. I needed information, and the only way to get it was to break the primary rule the moment I stepped out of this glorified closet. Never leave the property without instruction. I slipped out of the service entrance before dawn, the gray uniform oddly insulating against the biting morning chill. I took my old car, a calculated risk, as it was easily identifiable, but I needed the speed and anonymity of my own vehicle over whatever the rich man provided. I drove straight to the district where my parents lived, the oppressive silence of the wealthy enclave replaced by the nervous tension of the commuter rush. I parked 3 blocks away from their mansion and approached on foot, praying the automated perimeter scans wouldn't flag me. The house looked exactly the same, impenetrable, smugly perfect. I couldn't risk going to the front door. Instead, I circled around to the rear garden, the area my mother always complained about having too many weeds in. I found a low section of the stone wall bordering the property, partially obscured by overgrown ivy. This was the moment I realized the true extent of my predicament. I wasn't just cleaned out, I was used as collateral. Peering through the ivy, I saw a small glass-enclosed sunroom attached to the back of the house, a room I used to read in as a child. Inside, my father was sitting at a small breakfast table. He wasn't talking to my mother or Elena. He was on a video call, his face a roadmap of grim determination. And across the table from him, visible in the reflection on the glass, sat the broker, looking completely at ease in the house that had just cast me out. "It's done, Marcus," the broker was saying, his voice carrying clearly through the glass in the pre-dawn quiet. "The boy is settled in the house of your acquaintance. He has the necessary motivation now. He'll be watching your back while you finalize the transfer." My father, Marcus, nodded slowly, his composure finally cracking. "He must never know the terms, Elias. He can never know that his difficulty was engineered. Elena assures me he won't be able to reach out." "He won't, Elias," the broker replied smoothly. "He's under intense scrutiny. And besides, Marcus, you've given me precisely what I needed, a highly motivated, discreet cleaner with an intimate knowledge of your assets, who owes me his very survival. He will clean your house and monitor your competitors from the inside. A 2-for-1 deal." My father looked physically ill. "I can't believe I had to use my own son as bait." "Bait is such an ugly word, Marcus," Elias chuckled. "Think of him as an extremely valuable, self-policing intern. Now, about that ledger you promised me, the one detailing the overseas holdings?" They weren't just trying to get rid of me. They were using my debt crisis, which I now suspected they orchestrated, as leverage to force my father, their supposed business partner or rival, to hand over incriminating documents. My sister wasn't settling a debt. She was running interference and ensuring I stayed trapped. I stumbled backward from the wall, kicking a loose stone that skittered across the patio with a loud crack. The conversation inside instantly ceased. I heard my father's panicked voice, strained and high. "Did you hear that? I think someone's out here." Elias's voice, calm but instantly lethal, cut through the tension. "Stay calm, Marcus. If it's the boy, he won't dare approach. If it's someone else..." I didn't wait to hear the end of that thought. I turned and ran, not caring that the ill-fitting gray uniform was snagging on the rose bushes, not caring that I was sprinting down a perfectly manicured suburban street in the gray light of dawn. I was running from 3 directions at once: the debt that started it all, the man who now owned me, and the family that had deliberately sold me out to save their own skins and secure their illicit transactions. I reached my car, jammed the key into the ignition, and floored it, the engine protesting loudly. I needed to get back to the mansion, back to the safety, or at least the controlled danger, of the rich man's property. I had proof they betrayed me, proof of a massive conspiracy involving my family and the broker, and I had the means to expose it all, the encrypted drive currently burning in my pocket. As I merged onto the main road, glancing frantically in my rearview mirror for any sign of pursuit, be it the broker's people or a cleanup crew sent by my father, my burner phone, which I had carelessly left charging on the passenger seat, suddenly lit up, displaying an incoming call. The number was blocked, but the notification banner flashed one terrifying message before the call connected. Incoming secure call from Master. I slammed the brakes on the side of the road, heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I knew if I answered, I'd be caught in the net of his control. If I ignored it, he'd know instantly that I'd disobeyed his explicit order to remain on property and review files. I stared at the screen, trapped between 2 lethal forces, knowing that whatever I chose in the next second would decide whether I lived long enough to see noon. The screen of the burner phone pulsed an aggressive, demanding red. Master. The connection was secure, meaning my employer knew exactly where I was and that I was actively avoiding contact. The knowledge that he possessed surveillance capabilities capable of tracking me across the city, even managing my appointments remotely, was more terrifying than the thought of the broker finding me. At least with the broker, the threat was explicit. With my current employer, the danger was veiled in meticulous service contracts and unnerving politeness. I snatched the phone, my thumb hovering over the accept button. Answering meant submitting to his immediate authority, admitting my transgression. Ignoring it meant confirming my status as an unreliable operative, likely triggering immediate disciplinary action. Action I suspected involved more than just docking my pay. I hit accept. Liam. The voice was instantly there, cool, precise, and dangerously calm, as if he were commenting on the weather rather than catching an employee in flagrante delicto. You are currently not on the property. You are operating a vehicle registered in your own name, and you are failing to report for scheduled surveillance duty. Explain yourself immediately. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. The betrayal I'd witnessed a moment ago had fueled a reckless surge of defiance, but hearing his voice stripped it away, leaving only the cold, hard reality of my dependence on him. "Sir, I apologize for the deviation," I forced out, keeping my voice low and even. I encountered an unforeseen complication regarding the encrypted drive's contents. I needed immediate verification before I could proceed with the perimeter monitoring. "Complication?" he echoed, the word dripping with skepticism. "I provided you with profiles of liabilities, nothing more. What verification requires a full-scale, unscheduled road trip?" I took a desperate gamble, deciding to feed him a carefully curated half-truth, omitting Elena entirely, but hinting at the deeper conspiracy. "Sir, the primary symbol etched on that safe, the stylized bird, I recognized it. It's the insignia of a specific enforcement arm used by the network I owe money to. I realize that the entity pursuing me is directly linked to your security protocols." A brief, almost inaudible pause followed. It felt like an eternity as he processed the information, perhaps cross-referencing my statement with whatever data he already possessed. "Continue," he finally commanded. I drove to my former residence to confirm a suspicion. I witnessed my sister and my father in a meeting with the principal operator of that network, Elias. They were discussing a transfer of assets, and my being settled in my new role was part of the arrangement. Sir, they engineered my situation. They threw me out to gain leverage over my father, and they are using my desperation to secure documents that I believe pertain to your operational security. The silence this time was different. It was the silence of strategy being formulated at lightning speed. "Your sister," he mused, his voice hardening with a sudden, icy clarity. "Elena. I have always considered her more of a viper than her father. So they used you as a pawn to secure my protection, anticipating that I would then run interference for them against Elias." "Yes, sir," I confirmed, feeling a grim sense of vindication that my family's hypocrisy was finally acknowledged by someone who mattered. "And you witnessed this meeting. You have photographic evidence, I presume." "I do, on my personal device, which I had to retrieve before returning here," I admitted, knowing full well that admitting to having a personal, non-monitored device was another fireable offense. "Liam," he said, and this time there was a distinct edge of respect in his tone, chillingly mixed with threat. "You are either the most catastrophic liability I have ever inherited or the most useful tool. Which one will you prove to be?" He paused, then laid out his new directive, his voice firming into absolute command. "Forget the perimeter cameras. That level of surveillance is too decentralized for immediate threat assessment. Your next assignment is direct intervention. You need to return to your parents' residence, not as the cleaner, but as an infiltrator. You need to ascertain precisely what documents Elias is pressuring Marcus for. If they are the ledger detailing the offshore shell accounts he established to shield assets from my control, then we have a clear path forward. Return to my father's house? But they know I'm on the run. They'll have security alerted," I protested, glancing at the mansion looming in the distance, a fortress of betrayal. "They expect you to hide, Liam. They expect you to cower. They do not expect you to strike back from the weak position they forced you into. You will use the service entrance code I provided earlier, the one intended for your housekeeping access. It's a weakness in their physical security that Elias, in his arrogance, overlooked because he assumed his leverage over Marcus was absolute." He continued rapidly, clearly laying out a complex plan that utilized my access as the new cleaner for the wealthy man who supposedly lived next door to my parents. "You will go in, retrieve the ledger before Elias does, and bring it directly to me. You have less than 3 hours before Elias is scheduled to arrive at Marcus's residence for the final exchange. If you return empty-handed, or worse, if you return with Marcus and Elena having already handed over the documents to Elias, I will liquidate your debt by turning you over to a far less forgiving associate of Elias's, one who specializes in disposal, not collection." The air in the car grew thin. He was sending me into the lion's den, expecting me to steal the prize before the lion secured its meal. "If I succeed, sir?" I asked, the question tasting like ash. "If you succeed," he conceded, his voice softening fractionally, "I will not only clear your debt, but I will dismantle the entire organized scheme that put you in this position. I will protect you. You will have a new life, Liam, a clean slate, under my employment. But failure is not an option. If you see Elena, do not engage. She is a variable I will handle personally. Your focus is the ledger. He cut the connection before I could acknowledge the terms. I stared at the dead screen, the weight of the encryption key in my pocket, suddenly feeling like a live wire. I had 3 hours to break into my childhood home, face my treacherous family, and steal documents that could bring down a major criminal enterprise, all to buy my freedom from a man who was arguably more ruthless than the people I was stealing from. I took one last shaky breath, turned the car around, and accelerated toward the imposing gates of my old neighborhood, knowing that this next infiltration would either be my salvation or the defining moment of my incarceration, a date with a fate worse than any Ogromny Srok. As I pulled up to the familiar ornate gates of my father's property, I saw a car already parked just outside the perimeter fence, idling conspicuously. It was black, tinted, and instantly recognizable as the unmarked transport favored by Elias's high-level enforcers. My 3-hour window had just been cut in half. They were already here, and I was about to walk right into the crossfire between my treacherous family, the criminal network they betrayed, and the powerful man who was currently holding my life hostage. I reached into the glove compartment, pulling out the heavy antique letter opener my employer had left on his desk, the only weapon I had, and prepared to use the service entrance code. The black car idling just outside the perimeter confirmed my fears. Elias hadn't waited. His network was punctual, perhaps tipped off by my father's panicked confirmation that I was heading back. I gripped the letter opener, a cold, heavy reassurance in my palm, and keyed in the service code on my employer's burner phone. The gate slid open with its expensive, almost silent efficiency. I parked my old car behind a large hedge, effectively hiding it from the view of the main house, and slipped through the side door. The house was utterly silent inside, an eerie contrast to the high-stakes drama unfolding just yards away. The front area, the domain of my father's carefully curated public life, was empty. I moved swiftly toward the rear of the house, my mind locked onto the layout I knew intimately. The sunroom, where I'd seen the meeting, was on the ground floor. The study, where my employer kept his own secure assets, was upstairs. But I was looking for the ledger, which my father kept hidden somewhere his wife or daughter wouldn't find it. Where would a man like Marcus hide something this damning? The answer hit me. Not in a private safe, but hidden in plain sight within his sanctuary, his upstairs office, which he treated like a fortress against his own family. I took the back stairs 2 at a time. The office door was locked, naturally. I remembered an old trick my father taught me years ago, showing off the security of the lock mechanism after a minor repair. A thin piece of specialized plastic, a laminated library card perhaps, could bypass the inner tumbler if pressed just right. I didn't have that, but the letter opener, polished and sharp, might serve as a crude shim. Feverishly, I worked the blade into the narrow gap near the latch, praying the mechanism wasn't updated. After a nerve-shredding minute, I heard a faint click. The door swung open silently. The office was dark, save for the glow emanating from the hallway, and there, on the massive desk, was the ledger. It wasn't bound. It was a stack of thick, watermarked financial sheets held together by a heavy-duty clip. And standing over it, his back to me, was my father, Marcus, frantically stuffing the papers into a reinforced briefcase. "Dad?" I whispered, the betrayal heavy in my voice. Marcus froze, his shoulders slumping instantly as if the weight of the entire conspiracy suddenly settled on him. He turned slowly. His face was ashen, etched with a profound mixture of fear and crushing guilt. "Liam, how did you get in? I told Elias you wouldn't dare." "Elias was wrong about a lot of things, Dad. Apparently, including my loyalty to you people, I retorted, stepping fully into the room, my makeshift weapon held loosely at my side. What is this? What deal did you cut with him? And why did you have to hand me over to my employer to clean up your mess? Before Marcus could formulate an excuse, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed from the main hall below, not creeping like mine, but marching with unmistakable authority. Elias was early. "They're here," Marcus hissed, eyes wide with panic. He grabbed the briefcase. "It doesn't matter now. Give me that letter opener, Liam. We need to look like we're cooperating." "Cooperate? You sold me to him!" The door to the office burst open with explosive force, splintering the frame. It wasn't Elias. It was my employer, the man with the slate eyes, accompanied by two silent, broad-shouldered figures wearing identical gray uniforms, only theirs were clean, crisp, and ominously well-fitted. They moved with a trained lethality that made the thugs waiting outside look like amateurs. "Marcus," my employer said, his voice resonating with cold finality, "the game is over. I trust Liam secured the original ledger for me?" Marcus instinctively held the briefcase tighter. "This is my property. You have no jurisdiction here." My employer didn't even glance at Marcus. His eyes locked onto mine. "Liam, the ledger, now." I looked from the ledger clutched by my father, the object that could buy my freedom, to the man who had offered me protection, knowing full well he was orchestrating a takeover of his rival's operation, using me as his inside man. I made my choice, not for freedom, but for survival and leverage. I didn't move toward my father. Instead, I raised the letter opener, and with a sudden, decisive movement, I plunged the tip not at my father, but into the nearest object of value, the leather-bound spine of a massive, antique first edition, a book my father cherished more than any person in that house. The blade ripped through the leather with a tearing sound. "I have the ledger," I announced, not to my employer, but to Marcus, loud enough for the men in the hall to hear. "But I don't trust either of you. This ledger proves your involvement with Elias, Marcus. If you hand it over to your associate now, Elias will simply eliminate both you and me to tie up loose ends." I looked directly at my employer. "I don't want freedom bought by servitude. I want immunity. If you want the ledger that proves you can dismantle Elias's network, you deal with me as an equal. You give me assurance, a signed guarantee on paper, notarized tonight, that my debt is cleared, that I am untouchable, and that you will provide me with the resources to disappear permanently, without servitude." The tension in the room was unbearable. Marcus sagged against the desk, defeated. My employer stared at me, assessing. I had effectively taken the ledger hostage from both factions. "A guarantee?" my employer finally sneered, a flicker of genuine amusement crossing his face. "You're asking for a contract of protection against the very people who hired you?" "I'm asking for the cost of my silence and my expertise, paid up front," I corrected him. "I know your operation is bigger than Elias. I know you want the ledger to control the assets. I just want out, cleanly. You get the documents, you neutralize Elias, and I walk away without a history, without a debt, and without being forced into your schemes." The slate-eyed man stepped fully into the room, his two operatives fanning out, blocking Marcus from fleeing. He pulled a small, slim device from his own pocket, a mobile encryption pad. "You have guts, Liam, a rare commodity when fear is involved," he conceded. He tapped furiously on the device. "I will draw up a contingency agreement, complete debt erasure, 10 million untraceable credits deposited into an offshore account I will set up for you, and guaranteed non-interference from my network. In exchange, I get the ledger now, and you disappear within the hour." He didn't wait for my verbal acceptance. He simply held the device out. On the screen, the terms were displayed in stark digital text, complete with a space for a digital signature. Marcus watched in stunned silence as his son, the outcast, dictated terms to the man threatening his entire operation. Elena's betrayal had bought me a seat at the adult table. I stepped forward, took the device, and without reading the fine print, because I knew better than to trust any fine print from these people, I applied my thumbprint to the authentication field. A digital confirmation flashed green. My employer snatched the device back, and Marcus, seeing his leverage gone, let the briefcase fall with a heavy thud. He didn't even look at me. My employer nodded curtly to his men. "Secure the documents. Marcus and Elena will be held for questioning regarding their unauthorized dealings with Elias. Clean this room. Every trace of this confrontation needs to vanish before sunrise." He looked back at me, his gaze lingering one last time. "You played the game better than they did, Liam. Don't forget what it cost you to learn the rules. Now go. Get back into that gray uniform. Your flight leaves in 90 minutes. I didn't argue. I walked out of the room, the weight of the world lifted, replaced by the terrifying weight of absolute anonymity. I was no longer the failed son, the desperate debtor, or the cleaner. I was a ghost, bought and paid for, walking away from the ashes of the life I never should have wanted. As I reached the service exit, ready to vanish into the world, I heard the muffled but unmistakable sound of a brief, sharp struggle erupting from the office upstairs, followed by the heavy thud of bodies being moved. My employer hadn't just secured a deal, he was cleaning house, and I was the only loose end he'd successfully tied off by setting me free.